All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Elliott Ridgway. Um, I am an independent game developer based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And today I'm going to be giving a talk on GameMaker Studio 2, why you might want to consider using it for your project, some of its pros and cons. I'll be doing a couple of quick demos that show some of the features that GameMaker Studio has, and then I'll try to leave around 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. So, if you've been around the indie development community for a while, you've probably heard of Unity and Unreal as sort of the two big game engines that everybody's using. GameMaker Studio 2 is not as popular, which I think is really unfortunate because I think that it holds its own really well against some of these more well-known tools. Um, so about 4 years ago, I started working on my 2D RPG project called Moncon, which I'll talk a little bit more about at the end. And I was trying to decide on what tool that I wanted to develop it in. And I'd kind of worked my way down to I'm either going to do it in Unity or in GameMaker Studio 2. And I'm just going to sort of put the two tools side by side and see which one I have a better experience with. Um, and Ben and Alex kind of alluded to this earlier in the introduction a couple minutes ago. Unity has a pretty steep learning curve to it, and when I switched over to using GameMaker, I found the experience was just night and day. GameMaker Studio is just a much easier tool to get your feet wet with and just start running with. So yeah, I think that's kind of the big selling point, in my opinion, for GameMaker is that it's really quick to prototype games. If you have an idea for a game, GameMaker, it's just everything is kind of tailored to you just getting up and running really quickly. You don't have to fight with the interface. You don't have to set up a lot of things. You can just start writing code and you're off to the races. The Ben and Alex mentioned this a little bit earlier. GameMaker is really easy for beginners to pick up. So you don't necessarily have to have any programming background to start using GameMaker. And like I said, the interface is really easy to use. Everything's kind of tailored to you getting started really quickly. But also it scales really well for more complicated, sophisticated sorts of games that you might want to make in it. It kind of spans the whole spectrum, really. If you want to just do a simple game, GameMaker is great for that. But also if you have in mind, this big epic experience that is going to have a lot of moving parts, it scales all the way up to that as well. GameMaker is primarily for PC game development, but it exports to pretty much all the other platforms. You can export to Mac and Linux. All the consoles are supported, so you can put your game on Switch, on Xbox, on PlayStation. Mobile is supported as well, and also web browser games. So it can pretty much, if you can think of it and it's a mainstream platform, GameMaker can probably export to it. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to be a coder to use GameMaker Studio 2. They've got their own drag and drop logic that's kind of similar to Scratch, where you're just sort of putting blocks together to describe the logic of your game. But if you are a coder, GameMaker's got a really nice language that's pretty similar to C or C++ for writing your code in. And then I'm going to nerd out a little bit here about some of the programming features that it does have. If you've got a background in computer science, you'll be happy to know that it's got all the major data structures supported. So arrays, lists, maps, queues, they're all pretty much there. Object inheritance, which is really nice. So if you design an object in GameMaker that's got certain properties, certain logical behaviors, you can make a child object and it inherits all of those behaviors from the parent. Saves a lot of time. Functions were added recently to GameMaker, which is really nice. Previously, you sort of just had to write these long bodies of code, and if you had repeated sections, you couldn't really encapsulate it into like a repeated section like a function provides you. So functions are there now, which is really nice for encapsulating and isolating logic in repeatable chunks. And then GameMaker's got some game-friendly loops, which are really nice. So there's a keyword in GameMaker called with that is kind of unique to GameMaker, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later in the demo. Um, it's got a lot of animation editors built in. So if you're doing pixel sprite art, GameMaker's got some nice animation tools for pixel art. Skeletons. So if you want to do bone animation where your character is just made up of a lot of sub images like a head and an arm and a leg and stuff like that, and you want to animate it with a skeleton, GameMaker can do that too with a third party tool called Spine. Recently, they added curve animations to GameMaker, which is really nice. So if you want objects to move around on the screen with smooth curves, it can do that now. And yeah, it just keeps scaling up in the complexity of what you can do. So particle systems are supported if you want to do like dynamically generated fire or rain or snow or something like that. It's got some support for 3D. So I didn't mention this at the beginning, but GameMaker is primarily a 2D tool for 2D games, but it's got some 3D support, so you can draw 3D surfaces with perspective and stuff like that. And if you're familiar with shaders, which is basically just little graphical flair that you can do with games that it's pieces of code that run directly on the graphics card of your computer, so they run really fast. Um, if like I said, if you're familiar with shaders at all, you've probably heard of GLSL, which is kind of the shader language for OpenGL. All of those functions that are provided with GLSL are also available in GameMaker. GameMaker's documentation is great. I can't really stress this enough. A lot of tools out there kind of fall down on the documentation front. Either they don't have enough examples or not all of the functionality is documented everywhere that it should be. So GameMaker doesn't fall into that trap, fortunately. They've got lots of examples out there, lots of great documentation. So if you're ever scratching your head on how something works in GameMaker, the manual is your best friend. And debugging tools are great too. If you've been a programmer for any number of years, you'll probably be familiar with the workflow that goes with a debugger. So pretty much all the main debugging features that you would expect are there. You can step through your code one line at a time. You can inspect objects as your game is running and see like what states the variables are in, and you can kind of debug your game that way. So a lot of really nice features all around. And I wanted to include this slide just to sort of allay any doubts that GameMaker couldn't be used for major indie game development. These are some examples of games that were designed in GameMaker that are pretty mainstream indie games. So if you've got a dream to be a big indie developer, these are some examples of what's gone before using GameMaker. So there are some downsides to GameMaker. There's a few situations where I would say you might want to consider using a different tool. The biggest one I think is that GameMaker's 3D support is not great. So if you have in mind a full-blown 3D experience, something like Mario Odyssey or something like that, you probably want to refer to Unity or Unreal for that, because while GameMaker can do 3D, like I said, it's just kind of drawing vertex surfaces one at a time, which is not practical for a more detailed sort of 3D game. So if 3D is your thing, you probably want to go with a different tool. Their HTML5 export is not great. And this is something that I don't have firsthand experience with, to be honest. This is something that people online were complaining about with GameMaker. So buyer beware, I guess, if your target is web browser games. Although I will say, the company that makes GameMaker was recently bought by Opera, which is a company that makes the Opera web browser. So I could see GameMaker improving their support for web browser games in the future, since they're now owned by Opera, and Opera is primarily focused on the web. And this is also a pretty big drawback. If your target is consoles or something like that, their platform licenses are kind of expensive. Just the base version of GameMaker is not too bad. I think that it's somewhere in the $100 to $200 range to buy a license for GameMaker. But If you want to export to other platforms, like say to the Switch, the cost of licensing rises pretty steeply. So if you're a no budget indie developer like me, that could potentially be a drawback for you using GameMaker. Okay, so now we're going to get into a demo that shows off GameMaker and some of the features that it has. So I'm just going to switch over here. So this is what GameMaker looks like when you first open it up. This is the view that you're going to get pretty comfortable with if you use GameMaker. So I'm going to just sort of break down everything that's on the screen here really quickly. So this dark green area in the center here is your workspace. This is pretty much, like the name implies, where you're going to be doing all your work. So everything from editing sprites to writing scripts to working with tile sets, all of that's going to be done in this area of the screen here. Down at the bottom is the console. So as your game is running, if there's any diagnostic information that GameMaker needs to alert you about, any errors or warnings or things like that, all of that's going to get printed out down here at the bottom. And then over here on the right side is the asset browser. So all of the assets that make up your game, all of your sprites, all your objects, animations, scripts, pretty much all that stuff goes in here. And all of these folders are provided for you with a new GameMaker project, so you don't have to create these yourself. Although recently, GameMaker lifted the restriction that each type of asset has to go in the associated folder. So if you don't like this organization, you can rearrange stuff however you see fit. So I'm going to give a quick preview of what this demo is going to be about, just to sort of give you all the roadmap for where we're headed here. I have two parts to this demo, two different game concepts, if you will. And I figured that this would be a better way to show sort of what GameMaker can do rather than just starting from a completely blank project and writing everything, one line of code at a time. I think this will be a more instructive preview of what GameMaker can do. So yeah, I'm going to run my project here and just to show you guys what we're going to do. So to run a game in GameMaker, the play button up here is what you click on. So I'll get this running. And so this is going to be the first part of our demo. This is like your classic arcade space shooter kind of game. I've already written a little bit of code to get this up and running. So my guy is the blue ship on the left, and we have these bad guy ships on the right side of the screen. So if I push on the arrow keys on my keyboard, I can move my ship around, and then pushing the space bar on the keyboard will shoot these little projectiles. And if one of these projectiles collides with one of the bad ships, then it disappears. So pretty rudimentary, not much exciting going on here yet, but we're gonna add some features to this and make it a little bit more interesting. And then the other demo, or the other part of this demo is a like a Mario clone kind of game. So I've got this this character coded up to walk around on the screen. He can jump and stuff like that, and he collides with these white squares. So this part of the demo is going to be focused on talking about tiles and tile sets. So we're pretty much going to be designing the background that goes behind this character in this part of the demo. So circling back to the first part of the demo, the space shooter, let's open that up. So that screen that we were looking at earlier is this this asset here where my mouse is, called Demo Room 1. Everything in GameMaker is broken up into rooms. So you can think of rooms as like the screens of your game or the levels of your game if you prefer. So the word that GameMaker uses for that is rooms. So here's the room for our space shooter game that we were looking at earlier. And I'm gonna get rid of this tile grid because we don't need it. You can click on this toggle grid button up here to turn that off and make it a little bit easier to look at. Yeah, so let's talk about layers next. So every room in GameMaker is comprised of one or more layers. And layers are a really nice way, first of all, to organize the content in your room, and just sort of keep straight what's what. But also, layers do impact the depth that things are drawn at. So things that are at the bottom of your layer stack are going to be drawn first, and then the next layer up will get drawn, and so on and so forth. But they're also a great excuse me, an organizational tool. So the layers are over here on the left side of the screen when you've got a room open. So you can see that our bottom layer is called background, and all of that's doing is drawing this this space background that I found on Google. And so to sort of demonstrate that, I can turn the layer on and off to show you that that's all that's on that layer. And then the next one up is this layer that I've called good guy. And the only thing on this layer is our blue ship that the player controls. Um, Also, by the way, when you're clicking around on these layers, you can see what's on them in this section down here, the section called layer properties. So if I click on background, we can see that the background image is what this layer is focused on. If I click on this, this object that's called O hero ship is what's on this layer. And then if I come up to bad guys, O bad ship, three of these are on this layer. This top layer effect, there's nothing on it yet, but that's kind of what this demo is going to be focused on. Is we're going to add some effects to this game to make it look a little bit nicer. One other thing to note here before we move on, you might notice that these objects that are in our room are prefixed with a lowercase o. So we've got O hero ship here, and then on the bad guys layer, we've got these O bad ship objects. That's kind of a GameMaker convention for organizing the assets in your game. So you don't necessarily have to follow this if you don't want, but it just kind of helps to keep things organized. So everything that is an object is prefixed with a lowercase o. And then if you have similar assets in your game that are, for example, sprites that may appear similar, you can prefix those with a lowercase s to indicate that they're sprites as opposed to objects. So it's just a simple way to kind of keep things organized as you're working on your game. So what we're going to do here is let me actually just run the game again to kind of illustrate what we're going to do. So if I hit the spacebar here and a projectile flies out of my ship and collides with one of the bad ships, the ship just kind of blips out of existence, which doesn't look great. So we might want to add something like an explosion when the projectile collides with the bad ship. So let's add an explosion here to make this look a little bit more interesting. So everything in GameMaker starts with sprites. So before you do anything with layers, before you add any logic to your objects, you have to start with sprites. So I'm going to go back over to my workspace, and I'm going to come over here to the asset browser and expand my sprites folder. And you can see that I've already created a couple of subfolders inside of sprites, one called demo 1 and one called demo 2 for the two parts of our demo here. And in here, inside of the demo 1 folder, we can see that there is an S bad ship sprite, an S hero ship sprite, and so on. The lowercase s is S is for sprite, like I was saying earlier. This kind of helps us distinguish between what's a sprite and what's an object. Yeah, so if I double click on one of these, we can open up the sprite and look at it. So this is what a sprite editor looks like in GameMaker. So on this screen, you can control where the center of the object is. It's kind of hard to see here, but this little crosshair thing here tells GameMaker where the center of the object is. And then if I click on edit image, we can go into like a paint editor and actually draw on the image and change it and stuff like that. So let's add our explosion sprite first. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to right click on my demo 1 folder and bring up this context menu, which has a bunch of options for the asset browser, and we're going to create a new sprite. So if I come to create, and then in the sub menu here, I'm going to go down to sprite. Yeah, so this is what a new sprite looks like. By default, GameMaker is going to try to give it just sort of a temporary name. So it's called Sprite 8 right now, but we're going to rename it to S explosion. All right, so now all we have to do is make the explosion animation. So we could draw this by hand, but you might, for example, get the explosion animation off the internet. You might be working with an artist who's working in a tool other than GameMaker to make your art. So what's more common than you, and I'm not trying to downplay the built-in sprite editor that GameMaker provides. It's perfectly fine, but what I found to be more common is that you'll be designing your art in another tool like Photoshop or something like that, and then you're going to be importing it into GameMaker. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So to import sprites, you click on this import button here. And one of the nice little shortcuts that GameMaker provides you is if you have a strip image, so an image where the animation is all stored in the same image, but as a strip of images. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger to demonstrate this. So I have this explosion strip image, which you can see has the 6 frames of animation that's going to make up our explosion effect. If you have an image that is suffixed with this underscore strip and then the number of frames of animation, GameMaker is smart enough to automatically subdivide this image up into the sub images necessary to make the animation happen. So if I click on this and then go to open, and then GameMaker is just going to give me a little warning to say that, if you import an image, you can't go back. But that's fine. It doesn't matter here. So we can see that our explosion image has been imported, and it is automatically divided up into the 6 frames necessary, which we can see at the bottom here. So if we want to see this animation play, we can click this play button here. And this is going a little bit fast, in my opinion. So let's slow this down. So in the top left corner of the screen here, we have this FPS, or frames per second, field that we can edit. So right now it's running at a rate of 30 frames per second. So let's just slow this down to 15. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And then the crosshairs that I was talking about earlier are by default up in the top left part of the image. So it's generally good practice to try to put this towards the center of your image. That it's useful for things like image rotation and scaling and stuff like that. You just kind of want to think about where is the center of your object in 2D space. So I'm going to move this down here to the middle to say that tell GameMaker that the center of this sprite is about the middle of this animation here. So that looks pretty good. But what we need to do next is we can't put this sprite directly into our room. That's just kind of how GameMaker is set up. You can't automatically put a sprite in a room. So what we're going to have to do next is make an object for this explosion sprite, and the object is going to allow us to apply logic to the sprite. So let's close this, and then I'm going to collapse some of these folders here. So we're going to come to objects, right click on it, and then go to create, and then we're going to go to object. So again, GameMaker just gives us a reasonable default for our object, calling it object 6. So I'm going to call it lowercase o, capital E, explosion instead. And you can see that the editor for an object looks a little bit different than the editor for a sprite. The window is kind of broken up into these 2 parts. So we have this part on the left that is sort of like a top level description of what our object is. So there's a sprite that's associated with the object, some information about the collision mask, whether or not the object is visible, and stuff like that. And then we have this events box that's kind of hanging off of the object here with this little green line. Events are the categories by which you group your logic for your objects. So everything in GameMaker is driven off of events. And an event is just what it sounds like. It's something that happens in your game at a certain point in time. So for example, if I click on add event here, we can see all the different event types that you can associate with your object. So create is the first one. Create just says that, hey, when my object gets created, if I have a create event, then that does something when the object gets created. When the object gets destroyed, you might want to have a destroy event that does some kind of logic when the object gets removed from the game. step is really common. If you decide to pick up GameMaker, pretty much everything that you do in GameMaker is going to have a step event. And the step event is just sort of describing that you want something to happen on every update loop iteration of the game. So anytime that the state of the game is updated, if you have a step event associated with an object, it's going to get executed on that next update of the game. So first of all, before we get into actually writing the event for our explosion, let's pull the sprite in. So we can do that by clicking on this this little area here that says no sprite. And if I click on that, it brings up this flyout dialog here that allows us to browse to the sprites of our game. And we put it in the demo1 folder. Yeah, so here's our S explosion sprite. So if I just click on this, now our O explosion object is associated with the S explosion sprite. So we actually have enough here that we can put it in our game. Now, like I said, you can't put sprites into rooms, but you can put objects into rooms. So just to sort of demonstrate what this looks like, I'm going to drag an O explosion object off of the asset browser here on the right side and put it in the center of the screen here. So, and now if I click play, yeah, so we can see our explosion object is there and it's animating the way we would expect. So this isn't quite what we want yet. We want the explosion to appear when one of our ship's projectiles collides with one of the bad guy ships. And then we don't want this animation to just loop endlessly. We want it to appear once and then disappear from the game. So let's get rid of this for now. And let's get into the logic for the object so that we can implement what I just described. So the first thing that we want to do is have this object remove itself from the game when the animation finishes playing. So GameMaker provides an event that you can use at the end of an animation. So if I click on Add Event, and then I come down to Other, and then here about the middle of the menu, there's an animation end event that we can use. So like I said, this will happen when the animation finishes playing. So that step of knowing when to execute this event is handled for us by GameMaker. All we have to do is tell GameMaker what should happen when the animation finishes playing. So we're going to write some code here now, and I apologize if you don't have a background in programming, but I'm going to try to keep things simple and explain what's happening as I go. So to remove an object from GameMaker, you use a built-in function called instance destroy. So we're going to type instance underscore destroy here. And then instance underscore destroy takes one argument. And again, if you don't have a background in programming, an argument is just a property that gets passed to a function in your language. So it's the information that goes between these braces here that is just telling GameMaker, hey, I want you to destroy something, but what is going to get destroyed here? And so for an object to refer to itself, in this case, because we want the explosion object to destroy itself when the animation finishes playing, GameMaker has a way to have objects reference themselves, and that's done with this self.id property that objects have. So self.id is just a way for the object to point to itself. So just to kind of review here, when the animation end event happens, this section of code is going to get executed. It's going to run this instance destroy function, and the instance destroy function takes the self.id pointer to the object self as its argument. So we can put this back in our game here and see what happens now. So let's put the O explosion object here. And what we'd expect to happen is for the animation to just play once, and then the object is just going to disappear from the game. So let's see what happens. Yeah, so that's great. What we expected to happen happened. So the object just destroyed itself after the animation finished playing. So this is still not quite what we want. We want the explosion to appear by the bad guy ship when a projectile appears with it. So let's work on that next. So we don't need to do anything else with this O explosion object, so we can close this. And then just to keep organized, let's put this in the Sorry, I think I lost audio there. Can you all hear me? Okay, all right, thanks. Right, so let's have the explosion appear next to the bad guy ship when a projectile collides with it. So we're going to update the logic for this oh bad ship object that I created ahead of time. So let's open this up, and we can see that I've already created 2 events for this ship here. We have a create event, so when the object gets created, GameMaker is going to do some logic, and then we have this step event, which, like I said, this event will get executed on every single update of the game anytime that the game loop moves forward by a step. So let's open this up, and this is a little bit more complicated than the previous example that we were looking at, but I'll try to explain what's going on here. So this first line is a if statement conditional, which just says if something is true, then move to the block that's inside of these curly braces here. This place meeting part here is another built-in GameMaker function. So place meeting is just saying if something is colliding with this object. So what this is achieving is when the projectiles coming from the hero ship collide with the bad guy ships, that's when this if statement would resolve to true. And then within here, we have our instance destroy function, which again is referring to self.id. But in this case, we're looking at the bad guy ship instead of the explosion object. So in this case, self.id refers to the current bad guy ship that we're looking at. So what we want to have happen is when a projectile collides with the bad guy ship, we're going to create a new explosion object and have it appear at the coordinates of the bad guy ship. So to do that, we're going to write a new function, or rather write a new line of code that refers to a GameMaker function. And it's got a similar name. It's called instance underscore create underscore layer. And if you might have seen this pop-up menu, which is kind of nice. GameMaker will try to give you hints if you start typing a function, and let you know what's already available, so that you don't have to know every single function name off the top of your head. You can just kind of pick from this list. So I mentioned the argument list earlier for instance destroy. In that case, it takes 1 argument. Instance create layer takes 4 arguments. And if you're in doubt about what a function can take in GameMaker, they give you this nice little hint at the bottom of your code editor here. So you can see that we have this instance create layer text that's highlighted in white, and then this dithered gray text to the right that tells you what the arguments that are expected for this function. So you can kind of glance down here and check yourself to make sure that you're providing the correct arguments. So instance create layer takes 4 arguments. The first one is the x coordinate of the new instance that we're going to be creating. The second one is the y coordinate of the instance that we're going to be creating. The third one is the layer that we want to put the new instance on, and then the fourth one is the object that we're going to be creating. So in this case, for the XY coordinates, we just want to provide the XY coordinates of the bad guy ship. So because we're inside of the logic for a single bad guy ship, we have these built-in XY variables that you can see that are highlighted in green here on the first line of code. So we can use that to tell the game where to put the explosion object. So I'm just going to type x comma y comma. The next layer, or the next argument is the layer that we want to put this on. And so we're going to use that effects layer that I was talking about earlier. So this will get drawn on top of everything in our room because it's the top layer. So I'm going to put effects here, and then we need to give it the object that we want to create. So we want it to create an explosion object. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to push play here. And now when I shoot a projectile at the ship, little explosion animation appears next to the ship. So I think that looks a lot better than what we had earlier. So that was kind of a crash course on the process of bringing in graphical assets into your game and assigning logic to them. So now we're going to move on to the second part of the demo. And this is going to be more focused on tiles and tile sets. So really quick, I'm going to take a quick detour here to show you how GameMaker determines which room gets displayed first. So in the Rooms menu here on the right side of the screen, you can see that there's a little house icon next to Demo Room 1. That is indicating that Demo Room 1 is the place where GameMaker is going to start. I guess you could think of it as like a, your home, I guess, is why it's a house icon. So we want to focus on this other room for now. We're kind of done with the space shooter demo. So I want Demo Room 2 to be the new home of my game. So if I click here to the left side of my room, I can get this room manager dialog that tells me, it allows me to reorder what order the rooms are arranged in for GameMaker. So pretty much all I need to do is I just need to move Demo Room 2 to the top of this list, and then it becomes my new home. So now if I close this, save my project, and then run the game again, now we're going to start in our second room, which is the Mario clone game that we saw earlier. So let's open that up. So this is our Mario clone room. We've got 3 layers here already. So on the left side of the screen, we've got a background layer, which is just drawing this blue background behind our character. We have this collisions layer, which has all of these white square collision objects that are allowing our character to stand on them. And then finally, we have this characters layer, which has our little Mario clone guy. So this background is not very interesting right now. We just have a solid blue sky and then some white squares for the platforms. So for a lot of games, especially if you're going for like a retro sort of NES, Super NES look for your game, you're going to be working with tiles. And so tiles are basically just little square parts of images that get repeated on the screen. So something like a piece of grass, for example, could be a tile. You could draw a piece of dirt for a tile. You could draw clouds for a tile. And then you just want to think about like what are the single image components that are going to be making up my room. And then once you've made a tile set, you can repeat those images over and over to draw out your levels. So ahead of time, I made this tile set that we're going to be importing into our game. So this is for another project that I've been working on. So this is our tile set that we're going to be importing, and you can kind of see the components that are going to be making up the level. So if you start in the top left here, you can see that there's like this little X brick thing, and then to the right of that there's this grass piece, and then another grass piece, and then some dirt, and then there's a tree here. So we can import this and start applying it to our level. So to do that, the first thing that we need to do is we need to make a sprite for our tile set. Like I said, everything in GameMaker starts with a sprite. So we're going to come back to our create menu, and then we're going to come down to sprite. And then we're going to call it S tile set. And then like before with the explosion, we're going to click on this import button. And then we're going to import our tile set here. So now we have our tile set in the game as a sprite. But GameMaker doesn't really know how to take this apart and put it into repeatable sections for us yet. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually make a proper tile set for this. So let's do that next. So in the tile set menu here, or folder rather, in our asset browser, I'm going to right click on this, come to create, and then choose tile set from this menu here. And so now we can make a tile set for our sprite that we imported. So like with objects, you have this no sprite section here that's set to nothing by default, but we can click on it and then browse to our sprite that we imported earlier and pull it in and associate it with this tile set. So we can see by default, if you look at the white square grid that's overlaid on top of our image, that the tiles that GameMaker wants to create here are too fine grained. So like look at this X brick, for example. We can see that there's 4 white squares going across and then 4 white squares going down. We don't really need that um, fine grain of tiles for this. So we can adjust the tile width and tile height over here on the right side of this window. So let's change this to 64 pixels across and then 64 pixels tall. So that looks much better. So you can see that the white squares now align perfectly with the components of our image that we want to use to build our level. And then we can just leave this as tile set 1 for now. That's fine. So now we need to make a new layer to put our tiles on. So tile layers are kind of special. They're indicated by this little sideways tile grid icon that is called Create New Tile Layer. So if I click on that, I now have a new tile layer added to my game called tiles_1. And now all we need to do is we just need to associate our tile set that we created earlier with this layer. So if I click on no tile set here, I can open up my tile sets folder and then choose tile set 1, which I imported earlier. So now this part is kind of fun. This is where you can get kind of creative. So we have all the images over here on the right side that we can use to start building our level. So all you got to do is you just have to click on the one you want to use, and then your mouse has got this tile behind it that kind of indicates where you're going to be drawing. And so now all you got to do is just kind of draw out your level. So, and like I said, you can be creative with this. You don't can just kind of be as artistic as you want and just kind of feel it out. And then we could add some clouds around here or something like that. So now if I run the game, already this looks a lot better than what we had before with the white squares. So this is starting to look more like a finished game now. So what I just demonstrated is one way of working with tiles. So if you start out with a tile set image like this one, you can use the approach that I just described. But you might be asking yourself, well, where do I get an image like this? Maybe you find it unintuitive to design your background in this way, where you're having to think about which pieces are repeated and what am I going to be able to reuse, and what if the edges don't quite line up, and what do I do in situations like that? So GameMaker's got a really nice little hidden shortcut that can take an image that is not a tile set and identify which components are repeated and break it down into tiles for you. So I can't really stress enough how much time this saves, especially if you're working with an artist who's using Photoshop or something, and maybe they don't want to create a tile set image like this. Maybe what your artist wants to do is to make an image like this, which all this is just a PNG image that's sitting on my computer. And you can see that there are repeated components to this that could be identified as tiles, but this is just an image. This is not a tile set yet. So how would you get this into GameMaker as a tile set that you could work with? So this is kind of frustrating because this is not a very well advertised feature of GameMaker, but it's just extremely useful. So that's why I'm emphasizing it so much here, I guess. The shortcut is under this room menu here at the top of the screen, and at the very bottom you have this convert image to tile map, which is going to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. So let's actually get rid of this tile layer because we're not going to need it, and let's import that image and convert it to a tile map. So if I click on room and then come to convert image to tile map, I'm going to import this pre-built background.png as my tile map. And we can see the GameMaker has pulled it in. And once again, our tiles are too fine. We have these smaller white squares that are going across our tiles here that are too particular. So I mean, you could do this if you wanted to to break these up into sub images, I guess. But for the purposes of this demo, we're going to expand this to 64 pixels by 64 pixels again, so that our grid of tiles lines up perfectly with our image here. And then it's going to create three things when we're done with this. So it's going to create a new sprite. So we're just going to call it S new tile set or something like that. It's going to create a new tile map. So we're going to just call this new tile set. And then it's going to add a new layer to our room. So we can just call this tiles_2 or something like that. And now all we got to do is click this generate map button. And just like that, our game now has the image that we created outside of GameMaker. It's broken everything up into tiles for us. So now everything exists on this tile layer like we had before. The only difference is we didn't need that tile map image. So you can see that it's broken up our image that we had imported into the game into the component tiles here on the right side. So a lot of that stuff that we weren't using before is gone. So there's some memory savings associated with doing it this way. And you're not locked into what was in the image. Now you can modify what the original image consisted of. So, like for example, we've got this weird looking spot on the right side of the screen where the image didn't quite extend all the way to the edge, but we can easily fix that by grabbing some new dirt tiles and expanding the scope of our tile set here. So yeah, that's just a really nice way to give yourself a head start if you're working on a level and maybe you want to start drawing it in a paint program or something like that. And then when you come to GameMaker, you can just take that image that you created and import it and give yourself all of the benefits of having a tile map without all the headache of trying to draw a bunch of little sub images and make sure that all the edges line up correctly. So yeah, that's pretty much the end of the GameMaker demo. So if you've held on this long, thank you. So just a little bit of personal information about me. If you're interested in learning more about GameMaker, I don't really represent GameMaker or anything like that. But if you wanted to email me and ask more questions, this is my email address. I'm also on the Tulsa Game Developers Discord group, and we have a GameMaker text chat on there. So if you want to message me on Discord, that's fine too. My game company, Megalithic Mainframe, has got a website as well, which is listed here. And we're on Steam and Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. And I've got two games that I'm working on right now, both of them being done in GameMaker Studio. The one on the top right there is called Shapeshift Sean. It's kind of a throwback to the 3D pre-rendered side scrollers of the Super Nintendo, like Donkey Kong Country. And then the other game project I'm working on is called Moncon. That's the screenshot in the bottom right. So if you're curious about either of those games, they're both available in the CSGC arcade on the CSGC website. And yeah, that's pretty much my talk. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take questions now.
All right. Thank you so much for being a part of CSGC 2021. So, a few questions that we have. The first one is, what would you say would be the right age group for GameMaker? Like, do you have to have a certain knowledge set to get into it? You know, what would be the entry level to get into building with GameMaker?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think just pulling a number off the top of my head, I think 10 and older would be appropriate for GameMaker. I think if you're younger than 10, I think a more basic tool like Scratch might be more appropriate. But like I mentioned earlier, GameMaker has got a drag and drop logic feature. So if you don't have any programming background, you can get started using GameMaker. But it might be a little bit overwhelming for younger kids. But I think 10 and older, I think should be able to handle it.
And what is the best, I guess, platform or output for GameMaker? What would you said there were some bugs with like 3D stuff, so if you were developing a game, what type of game would be best suited for building in GameMaker?
Definitely 2D games. So yeah, 3D, like you alluded to, is not very well supported. You can do stuff like, you're drawing like a square and it's got some perspective to it. Basically a single vertex of 3D. And you could imagine somebody could just keep doing that over and over and build a 3D game, one vertex at a time, but that's not really the way most people like to work, I think. So definitely not 3D for GameMaker. I would say, like, use a tool like Unity or Unreal if you're interested in doing a 3D game. So definitely 2D games, and I think Windows PC is kind of the main platform that GameMaker is optimized for. But that's not to say that you can't put it on other platforms. All of the consoles are supported, but then you get into licensing territory where you have to buy a separate license in order to put your game on the Nintendo Switch, for example.
And our last question is, what resources are out there to learn more about GameMaker and get started with it?
So there's a lot of great YouTube tutorials on the topic of GameMaker, and these tutorials will go into a lot more detail than what I was able to do here. So if you want to follow along with somebody who literally starts from scratch and starts building a game, there's a lot of people on YouTube that do that. If you need like a specific example, there's a GameMaker tutorial YouTube channel. The guy's name is Sean Spalding. He makes really great GameMaker tutorials, and he was really instrumental in me getting started with GameMaker.
All right. Thank you again so much for your time today and participating in CSGC 2021.
Great, thank you for having me.